Amy from AuthorsBuzz. I am here once again with Tabitha. Hi, Tab.
Hi, Amy.
So we are continuing our conversation about writing romance, and we're going to dive right into the questions that everybody has about romance. How steamy should my scenes be? Should I have them descriptive? I mean, honestly, what words should I use? We're not going to get into that, I don't think, but you never know.
No.
It sounds like no, there are lists for that.
Yep.
You could just, the ones that you think are more descriptive are, and the ones that you think are less descriptive are. So we'll just leave it at that. Tab,
Well,
right?
yeah, I agree with that totally. You gotta this if you think it
Yes,
is, it's one of those things, and then it is, right?
yes, yes.
So I was thinking, like, before our conversation, and to kind of dovetail off of what we were talking about last time, just to recap the little bit of difference between romance and erotica, right? And to distill it down, in romance, it's really about the relationship and the story, and the relationship is central, and you really do need to have, conflict and angst and whatever and resolution amongst this relationship, and you still need to have that happily ever after ending. And erotica, to me, the difference is it's really more about the sexy times, and that's what drives the story. And then, to keep it interesting, you probably need some kind of plot around that, but you're really in it for those, for the sexy stuff. So let's say now that we're writing romance, right? We're really and all the subgenres we talked about last time, romantic suspense or historical romance or sci-fi romance, all of those subgenres. You're writing a romance story. So you've got a good plot, you've got main characters, you've got a supporting cast, you've got major conflict happening, angst, whatever, and then you've got resolution at the end. So you've got your story. So now you're trying to decide, like, how sexy do I make it, right? And it's like,
Right,
and
right,
let me
right.
start by saying there's not a right answer to that. There's just a way to do it well, whatever you want to do, however you want to do it, I think, is the thing to think about. So the first thing I'd ask myself, and I did ask myself when I started writing romance, is how comfortable are you writing these scenes? How comfortable are you writing sexy scenes? And how descriptive do you want to be? And
Right.
then you can do that level well, and you can read other writers that you're like absorbed in that, and you're like, wow, that was really beautifully written, or like, wow, that was so hot, like, it when you see it, when it's done well, but you have to
Right.
decide what fits the story you're telling and what's your own comfort level around it, right? So I think
Well,
that's the first thing.
I think almost, I mean, people come in so many different forms that I think almost any genre and any couple could have any kind of theme, right?
Sure.
And it could even be that scene matches what we know about them, or it shows a different side. But it also seems, number one, you have to be comfortable, but the other thing you do have to consider is there's audiences for all these different kinds of intensity, but you're creating your audience with the first thing you put out there. So you want to make sure you like writing this way. Not that you can have variety later on, but let me ask you a question. What you ended up writing, does that match what you like to read, or is it something a little different?
I like, I have to be honest, lately I've been not one I've been flipping through some of the steamy scenes in romance novels. I've been like, all right, and just
Is
kind
it
of
because you know
gauging.
them so well? It's because you know what they're going to, then they do this and then they do
Yeah,
that.
it's kind of a bit formulaic, right? So I'm finding,
Right,
which is
right.
so weird because I do love sexy scenes and I love reading them, and I use them as, here, honey, here's a scene for, whatever. Like, they're useful and they're exciting. And yet lately I've been more interested in the relationship and the story than the sexy scenes. And I sometimes feel like they're just kind of thrown in gratuitously, just because that seems to maybe be the expectation that this author has included this kind of stuff before. The readers sort of expect it. And that, I guess, is true, but I'm finding that I'm flipping through them. That's just me personally. So but then I asked myself, okay, if I'm flipping through some of these scenes, why? And so that I bring into my own writing. If I'm going to include one, what do I want to achieve with including a sexy scene? However steamy I want to write it, however, whatever language I want to use around it, whatever my descriptive way that and I think that sexy scenes can reveal something about your characters, right? I think, I think that it can give you an insight into them as a person. I think sort of our sexual proclivities are sort of baked into our personalities a little bit, and are we really adventurous? Are we really shy? Are we is this part of an awakening? Is this part of a deepening of like I don't know. So I think you can learn something about characters through these intimate scenes. And if you do that, they're more interesting. It's not just a formula of like, and first he does this, and then she does that, and then he does this,
Right.
and then she does that. It's
Right.
you're learning something about the characters. You're invested in this experience that they're having with each other. And it's interesting to you that way. So I think that's one thing. Definitely you can use a sexy scene as a payoff scene. Like if these characters have been circling each other forever, or it's like an enemies to lovers thing, and they've just been, and the tension's just been there, and finally you give them this explosive, hot scene together.
Right.
That's sort of like
Right.
satisfying, but if it's just every other couple of chapters is just a sexy scene thrown in for a good measure because you're writing a romance, I don't know. I'm finding I flip through the pages now about that
Well,
stuff.
probably because Tab, it's probably because it's written that way. It's probably
Right.
because the author themselves is like, oh, I need a sexy scene. So that's where you want to make sure, number one, that you're not being predictable to yourself, but you've got to find a way to make it authentic. Because
Right.
you can't really have your characters being like, it can't feel like that rote thing, or it's going to feel that way to the reader. So you kind of have to dig a little bit deeper into your characters and ask, like, what would this one like what fits what I know about them, or what know about their history,
Or what
and
can I
play around with them.
reveal about them
Yeah.
that we didn't know before, right? Through this intimacy, and it doesn't necessarily mean like I like XYZ, whatever, it can actually mean, like you can actually reveal, wow, this person is so confident on the outside, so whatever. And yet they have this real, shyness about their body, shyness about intimacy, or the other way around. They're super shy, but wow, they got waving their freak flag in the, and how cool. It adds another dimension to a character, right? So I think that seeing someone at their most intimate and vulnerable is revealing. And if you use pieces of that in your sexy scenes, I think they're going to be more interesting and more just like, oh, they will add to the story rather than just being something like, and then he did this, and then she did that, and then they did this, and that was really hot. And like
Yeah, like first base, second base,
yeah,
third base,
right.
like going back to whenever like that was a thing.
Yep.
Well, and the other okay, so I think the other thing is what makes it more or less steamy. Like what I'm thinking is, are they willing to have these experiences other places besides like just the bedroom? Like the bedroom is
Sure.
sort of like the classic, whatever. Like that's one way to. What are some ways of like what are some scalable ways to increase or decrease heat?
Well, I think it depends on like, are you, that's a good question. Because I've read stuff where it's pretty descriptive in terms of like, they're really the actual account is descriptive, and yet I didn't find it all that sexy. I don't know. So that I don't really know the answer to that question. I feel like that's something that it's individual to the person writing it, to the characters, and to the reader. And yeah, maybe just to make things interesting more, I don't know. That's a tough one.
I've this is
What do you
I've
think? You must have a thought about that because
well, I mean, for one, like I said, like having it be more spontaneous and different, not necessarily have to go back to the bedroom. And actually, to me, what's more interesting as a reader is that the writer has consciously taken time to put things in unpredictable order, because there is kind of, even if we look at movies or shows, there's kind of a progression of intimacy that we associate with like these is the order of the things. And
right.
mixing that up, or maybe, like the interrupted intimacy, right? So there's somewhere they get started, but then, they're not able to continue that.
Yeah, because you can use that as a
Unexpected.
tension building tool, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. The
What
other
they
thing
what
too
they
is like,
say to each other,
right,
I mean, do they dirty talk to one another? Do they
right,
not? Like all
right.
that kind of stuff.
And
It,
how, like, and like it can really start to sound similar, and then
it
and
can.
just
It
like
so
just
can.
like I
It
was
so
talking
can.
about under one of our other conversations where somebody gave me the edit that all my characters said thank you too many times, right?
Yes.
And
Yes.
what
Yes.
that note was essentially is that they all sounded too uniform. If you're
Yes.
using the same kind of language with each character, and sexy times is the same thing. Not everybody likes it the same or does it the same or talks the same or has the same. And I think that that's a fun place to add flavor to your characters if you so choose. And I was just thinking that reminded me of when I was writing the last book, the most recent book I wrote, romance book that I wrote. The character was injured for a good bit of the book. So that
Yeah, we were
prohibited
talking
me.
about
We were
that.
talking about
Yeah,
that. That prohibited me from actually having the payoff when it would have happened in their in the course of their relationship building, right? They would have done it much earlier, but because they started to see things that they started to really care about one another and they were stuck together in the situation, but they couldn't. So I had to then find ways to create sexy times, without the full on, full on. And that was kind of fun because I had to think through the eyes of the character who is this, funny, the male character. He's, funny, sarcastic, just playful, and also, sort of was kind of billed as a playboy before that, but not really. He just really liked sex and liked women, but he was also really searching for real intimacy. He'd had enough, and yet that big personality is still there. So I'm like, how can I, create this in these scenes without the, and it was kind of a fun exercise to have to do it that way. And I think that just don't be rote in your romance and in your sexy
right.
times, like don't just put it in because it's time, and don't just be follow the formula. Try to think outside the box. Who are these characters? What do they like? How does sexy times add to the person that
You still need to have the sexy times though. Like
yes.
you definitely, and you need to have enough of, I've read books that don't have enough, and there's
right.
like 2 or 3, and you're like, part of the reason I'm reading this is for this, so you gotta
right.
you gotta put it in for me.
Right. Well, especially if you're building like a really sexy character, where that's part of the, the allure of this is, wow, this is like the wounded hero and he's just so, and you just want to see him in that vulnerable state. You want whatever. There's so many tropes, but yeah, you kind of want to see that side of him, or her, like you want to see that side of the person. So it's balance, I think, at the end of the day, like, does it work with the story that you're trying to tell? It when you read it, right? When it's a well-balanced story where you're like, wow, this was exactly fits. It was so steamy and hot. It added to the story. It didn't just feel gratuitous. I think those are things to consider. And there's not a right answer. There's just a way that works and doesn't in your particular story, right?
True, for sure. Mm-hmm.
So Amy and I are so tired today. We got online today. We're like, oh my God, I'm so tired. Are you so tired? Yes, I'm so tired. So we're a little bit brain dead. And we're like, let's talk about sexy stuff because that's fun at least, right?
Yeah. Well, what I'm thinking about now is you don't want it to be gratuitous, but there's a reason why certain phrases or certain whatever are hot, and that like triggers into like our collective consciousness of those things that are that we think of as sexy. Like there's always that kind of social, what I don't even soup of phrases and things. So I guess just be aware and consciously choose when you're doing that. And even before you begin writing, you're going to want to think about who's this person going to be like in bed, right? It might not be in bed. It might be on the kitchen counter, but
right. Anyway. See, you need to stir it up a little.
yes, stir it up a little bit. And you have to remember too, like this is these two, you have to put yourself in the situation of these two characters where, like you said, that tension is building. They are attracted to one another. So depending on what's going on in the rest of the story, that intensity should vary according to how, like how pent up they are to a certain extent, right? And what that looks like. And then there may even be something you're learning about either one of them. Like they might not express their full self because they don't know who this other person is, really. Like they're getting to know them. So that might be part of the journey too, of discovering what that looks like together. So that's something to consider to how you want to deal with all of that space. And maybe that's also what sometimes when you find the scenes boring, if they're the same kind of way, then there's no evolution so there's the evolution of their relationship outside the bedroom. There should be probably something going on inside the bedroom too, if you want to make it more exciting, authentic, and interesting to your readers.
Yeah, I agree. Like what does it, when we're in our most intimate and vulnerable space when we're there, but we also don't have to reveal our most intimate and vulnerable desires right away, and that's something, that can be explored over time with the characters, which is, I think.
And then was it you? And then there's the other way of doing it too. I don't remember if one of your stories did it this way or not, but where they have like the characters like have the one night stand or whatever, and then they have to work backwards to figuring out what else is there or not. And that's there's definitely no one way to do it, but think about what you want to read, think about what you want to write, have fun with it. The other thing is, if you feel more comfortable writing under a pen name, write under a pen name. If you don't want to put it all out there for your friends and family to know, like, what your personal freaky side is. That is one way, and it may not, and you may write about things that you may or may not like to do. Like it's not necessarily a one-to-one sort of thing, but sure. That could add a comfort level for some people to just write what they want to write, for sure. And I'm also thinking that the space in erotica, that we could really have things that are much more erotic romance, like a true blending of both, and that's, I'm sure, a space that's evolving. I don't really read it.
I think so, because I do read some stuff in that space, and that especially in the kinkier kinds of stories, that there are some really good, well written, and you care about the characters in the story, and yet it's definitely the whole focus is on the sexy times, but it works, and it's more than just a little novella. It's working through something. So that is an interesting space to want to explore as a writer, for sure.
Yeah, I think we're done. I can feel us tapering off here. So I think the next thing that we're going to do is what we talked about in the last video. It took me a second. Was creating a list of questions to begin with. So before you even start to write, to help figure out what kind of story you want to write. And Tabitha's going to make the questions and I am going to answer them. And we are going to pretend I am writing my first romance. Maybe I will.
Sounds like fun. I can't wait.